Hi, I'm Helen Bauer, and this is the Heart of Hospice podcast. The Heart of Hospice podcast is your source for compassionate and informative discussions about hospice and end-of-life care. I'm a certified hospice and palliative care nurse with over 15 years of experience. Whether you're a caregiver, someone with a serious illness, or you simply need to know more about hospice care, this podcast is for you. Join me as we explore all the aspects of hospice, from the details of caregiving to the emotional and spiritual dimensions of end-of-life journeys. For more resources and to connect with me, visit theheartofhospice.com and find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Keep listening for today's episode.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Today's episode features my guest, Elizabeth Uslander, co-founder and CEO of Empowered Endings. Elizabeth is a mission-driven executive leader, a dedicated healthcare professional, and a passionate social entrepreneur at the helm of the movement to humanize healthcare. Elizabeth holds a Master of Theological Studies and a Master of Social Work. As the co-founder and CEO of Empowered Endings and the executive chair of Empowered Endings Foundation, she works to optimize palliative and end-of-life care by ensuring transformational care and free education and support for patients, families, and professionals alike. She's a passionate change agent, committed to humanity, dignity, and agency throughout life, and especially in its final chapters. You can connect with Elizabeth and the team at Empowered Endings at empoweredendings.com and empoweredendings.org. Elizabeth started her journey as a seminary student studying spiritual care. She later became a social worker providing psychosocial support and bereavement care. Due to her background in education, Elizabeth now blends her roles as a social worker and a spiritual care provider to serve patients and families. Patient advocacy is a big part of the work she does as a social worker, and she's talking with me about the roles of social workers and the way they support patients and families. We also discuss the need for advanced care planning conversations, robust, full, and upstream. So check out her website, empoweredendings.com and empoweredendings.org. This is a great conversation. There's a lot to learn. Elizabeth, thanks for being on the show. Welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad to have you on the show. It's going to be a great conversation. I've been looking forward to this. You have such a wonderful energy working with Empowered Endings. And of course, I've had your husband on the show who also works with you. So it's going to be a great conversation.
You're very kind. I'm excited about it too.
It's going to be good. I want to ask you an icebreaker question to get to know you a little bit. I didn't share this question with you. So yeah, be prepared. But now that I look at the question and we've had a chance to get to know each other just a little bit, I think the question is perfect for you. So here's your question. Tell me something about your work that gives you joy.
Oh, wow. Well, that is a perfect question. A little bit hard to answer because there's so many things. I think that the thing that recently has been sparking the most joy is a decision that we recently made to donate the institute that we spent the last 4 years building to our nonprofit foundation. And by doing that, we've removed all barriers to accessing the community resources and education that we created. And the joy comes both from removing barriers to access so that more people can have more information and make the choices that are aligned with their values, but also from the conversations that I have with people about the work that we're doing and how we're doing it. The patients and families that we're supporting, of course, are so grateful for the transformational support and care that we provide, but also the healthcare professionals that we collaborate with and the people in the community who are interested in philanthropic work and service. Everybody gets really excited about the possibility of having more to share and having a place that is really committed to ensuring access to these vital resources for people to have dignified options and end-of-life journeys.
It's amazing work, but I want to focus on you first. Your work, your discipline that you bring to Empowered Endings focuses on psychospiritual aspects of end-of-life care and palliative care, and you're a social worker. So how did you come to focus on the end-of-life part of things? There are a lot of different areas a social worker can work in these days. How did you come to focus on end-of-life and palliative care?
It was a little bit of a long, winding journey. My career started in education, nonprofit work, NGOs, and government. And I was doing social services and also went to seminary to do spiritual care. And while I was in seminary, I studied bereavement, specifically bereavement support. And that really resonated with me. But I also didn't end up going into the ministry, and that's kind of a long story. So I went to seminary, graduated from seminary, studied spiritual care, and really wanted to support people one-on-one in their spiritual journeys, but ended up, because I wasn't going into the ministry, not having a mechanism by which to do that outside of a private practice. So then I went to study social work. And I was looking for the intersection of spiritual care and clinical care. And I kept running into hospice and palliative care. And I became really interested in this space that was linked to the bereavement spiritual care work that I had done before. But it began to expand. And I started looking at palliative care, which at the time was a relatively new field of medicine. I mean, it still is one of the newer fields of medicine.
Right.
And the impact that it was having to bring people in-home care or clinical care that was interdisciplinary, that included not just the physicians and the nurses, but also the social workers and the spiritual counselors. And that got me really excited about this intersection of spiritual and clinical care. And then I also started doing public policy work and really studying the ways in which different options that are available and support that isn't available impact people in their end-of-life and bereavement journeys. And so this was before, for example, it was evidence that bereavement care, appropriate bereavement care, is actually a public health policy benefit because it reduces the impact on public health costs later in life, because bereavement, positive outcomes in bereavement have strong correlations with positive health in as life goes on. So the intersection of all of those things were really fascinating to me. And it just so happened that I also had a few personal experiences that really kind of honed everything in together. My daughter's father died unexpectedly when she was 9 years old, and understanding her journey and then going through my own grief journey were a deep part of being interested in and able to show up for people in their journeys and really help people who, like I did and like she did, were feeling lost, disoriented, isolated, frightened, confused, and not really knowing how to get from where they were to where they wanted and needed to be, being able to walk with them through that with a really deep sense of compassion, having been through something that made me feel similarly.
It's very important work, very intense work to companion someone who is walking a grief journey, experiencing grief after a loss. So your education is not just in social work. You have a master's in theological studies as well. So basically you're a social worker and a chaplain, half of the interdisciplinary team rolled in together. How does your education and theological studies shape the work that you're doing as a social worker? They seem to be two separate realms.
That's a really great question that not a lot of people ask me, which I think it makes me very excited that you're interested. Social work, like other clinical fields, is clinical. It's a clinical discipline. So the training is clinical. Everything about the work is oriented in a clinical orientation. Spiritual care is different. Spiritual care is very grounded in meeting people at the depth of who they are and understanding them from their own perspective and walking with them through whatever it is that's troubling their heart and soul. Clinical work, similarly, it's obviously very important to meet people where they are and to walk with them in achieving whatever goals they have. But it's more practical. It's more cognitively based. Typically, it's more behavioral. It's more about the concrete elements of their life and relationships. Spiritual care is, I think, from my perspective, more about the inner world and the relationship with yourself. And so when you bring those things together, my experience has been that you get a really robust picture of a human being. It's not just the one or the other. It's the way that they interact together. And in my experience, that's vital because there are so many aspects of our human experience. And, a physician is trained to treat the disease in the body, and in hospice care specifically to help create comfort. Similarly, nurses are trained to understand what's happening with the body and guide the care according to what the body needs and what the person needs in relationship to their body. But the psychospiritual world is everything else. The intersection of spiritual care and social work is literally everything else. It's relationships. It's relationships with yourself, with your family, with your environment. It's unresolved issues. It's who you want to be. It's where you think you're going. It's what you think is happening. It's the things that you're afraid of, the things that you're excited about. It's all of that wrapped up in one space, which is this human being. And being able to connect with someone at all of those levels, for me, has been one of the most richly rewarding experiences of my life.
I think, in my experience, I've found that the value of the social worker, the psychosocial, and the spiritual, the chaplain, that is very undervalued and a little bit overlooked. Has that been your experience as well?
Sometimes, as you know, I'm married to my husband, who's a physician, and we work together.
Right.
One of the things that's great about working with him is he's very egalitarian. He is not the kind of doctor who considers the hierarchical positions as rigid, and he's always interested in hearing what other team members have to say. But not every doctor is like that. And my experience has been that some providers are more focused on that hierarchy, and some patients, of course, also experience that hierarchy. I think it's inculcated into us that the doctor is the person of authority.
Yes.
I think one of the things that's really interesting about that, in my experience working in hospice and home health, in a number of different teams, the social workers were always very well respected. The social workers were understood as the person on the team who is sort of able to translate between the clinical team and the patient and family experience. And so if there were ever any missing dots or things that weren't connecting, or if there was ever a breakdown in communication or understanding, the doctors and nurses and other team members and even the administrators often would look to the social workers for help in clearing things up and helping everybody align and get on the same page. So my experience was that the social workers were very well respected. But I also have the experience, having worked intimately with hundreds and hundreds of patients with my husband. So he is the physician and I as the social worker and spiritual counselor would go see patients and families for years together. And it's really powerful as a social worker to watch the peace wash over a patient and family as they're communicating with a physician who's really interested not just in the clinical diagnostics of the situation and what needs to be done for their body, but in who they are and how all of their life history and goals, wishes, and values integrate into the care and the care team. And I, as a social worker, do that all the time, but to see the impact that it had that occurred when a physician was doing it was really something. So I think that there is something socially valuable about that hierarchy. There is a level of credibility, authority, and experience that a doctor like Bob brings to the table. But I think that the interdisciplinary fields like hospice and palliative care have really brought together people who respect each other's work enormously. And of course, I know your background is in nursing. So the social workers and nurses were, always working really closely together. We're like besties on every case. We're trying to support each other. And, each of us understands our scope and understands that the other person fits all of the spaces that we can't fill. And so, so my experience is that there was a lot of respect and a lot of great collaborative partnership in that interdisciplinary work.
Yeah, it's so true. I have worked side by side with some of the best social workers and chaplains and learned from them. When I first started out in hospice, these were the people that were teaching me about patients' rights and autonomy and advanced care plan decisions and directives. I was so grateful. I was mentored by so many great social workers. You can't negate the awareness of mind, body, and spirit links. Because if a patient, you've seen it, a patient who's getting towards actively dying, and they begin to struggle existentially with guilt or regret or maybe fear about what's next, what's coming, what's out there, regardless of whether they've had a religious or a faith belief system. And then they begin to have pain or shortness of breath or anxiety. So those things begin to manifest physically. So here you have this mind, body, spirit link that you can't separate. You affect one, you affect the other. And the reverse goes if a patient is in pain, physical pain, and then they become anxious, and it can lead to depression, isolation. There's so many things associated with that. I love the strength of the interdisciplinary team. I really do. I try to tell patients and families that it's like a football team, that you're the coach. You call the plays. You're in charge. You decide and you run the team. And the quarterback just does what the coach tells. Yeah, so my mother's still a little startled every time I mention that, but I think that's just generational. I really do.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I also think linking this back to the initial conversation about the intersection of spiritual care and social work, one of the most undervalued, I think, by our community, by people who are on hospice and palliative care, one of the most undervalued positions is the chaplain, the spiritual counselor. I think people who are not specifically religious. So my experience has been people who are religious tend to already have their own personal spiritual care providers.
Right.
And people who are not religious and identify as spiritual wonder about the value of a spiritual counselor, a chaplain. There's maybe often some religious affiliation link in their mind, even if there is an ecumenically trained chaplain available. And I think that people often decline spiritual care because they don't understand the value of it, and they don't perhaps have the perspective that they are indeed in a spiritual journey. My perspective is that life, all aspects of life, including death, is a spiritual journey as much as it is any other kind of journey. And that's, I think, not a very common understanding of life. certainly not something that's well supported in our society or discussed robustly in our society, especially not without the religious overtones. And so having a social worker who could also connect with some of those spiritual needs and identify perhaps when a spiritual care provider would be appropriate, or even serve as a spiritual care provider while doing the clinical social work, was one of the things that I really enjoyed about that intersection that I talked about in terms of meeting patients where they were. Because I think a lot of times, and I experience this myself, we don't always know what we need. We don't always know where we are, and we don't know what to ask for. We don't even know what questions we don't know. And so being able to have nurses who are advocates for patients, even in the hierarchical medical system where they might have to question a doctor, having social workers who are intimately working with the nursing team to meet all of the patient and family needs by advocating for them, having social workers who understand spiritual care, all those intersections, I think, are just so beautiful. So it's such a rich space of healthcare. It still needs a lot of work, don't get me wrong. That's of course what we're doing with Empowered Endings, and that's why I went from being a social worker to a businesswoman and a philanthropist, is to help change all of the things that are still missing. But those things are such a core piece of the puzzle, and I think why it's such an intimate space, not just for the patients who are going through this intimate journey, but for the healthcare providers companioning.
Yeah. So do you think as healthcare providers that we have perpetuated these misconceptions about spiritual counselors, about chaplains? I mean, even chaplains themselves, because we do have chaplains, let's face it, to be honest, that go out to proselytize, convert, save, redeem, baptize, mostly Christian-based beliefs, and they consider that their personal mission.
I would say that's not been my experience, but you're in Houston and I'm in California. And I think that might have to do with some of the differences. I have always encountered chaplains who, even if they have a really strong connection with their faith, put the patient first 100% of the time. I have a colleague whom I adore. She is one of, in my opinion, most respected persons I've ever met in this work. And she is very devoutly Catholic, very devoutly Catholic. She is, I'm not actually even familiar with all of the titles, but she is in a very high position in her Catholic church, and she's very committed to her Catholic faith. And as I think you know, medical aid in dying is legal in California. Medical aid in dying is a process by which a patient can request medication from their physician to allow their life to come to a peaceful close if they are terminal adult and follow all of the legal requirements. She is Catholic. The Catholic faith clearly says this is not an acceptable thing. Right. And yet she meets patients and families who are going through this process and supports them in their spiritual journeys, even if they are not Catholic, even if they do not align with her personal beliefs and values. She understands how to show up for them in their journey. And she puts that first in her work with patients and families. And to me, that's an excellent example of what it is to be a chaplain.
Absolutely. That's the epitome of chaplaincy.
Exactly.
Interesting. So I want to make it clear for our listeners that for hospice providers and palliative care workers who interact with patients who choose medical aid in dying, we do have the option to withdraw ourselves from those cases based on our own personal, moral, ethical, faith beliefs. It's not as if we are forced to work with patients who are utilizing that process. I want to make that clear. I think that's important for people to know. So when we have someone on the team who's not comfortable with that, with the medical aid in dying, with MAID, for whatever reason, they have the right to recuse themselves from working that case.
As well, they should. I so appreciate that the law in all 11 jurisdictions in the United States where medical aid in dying is legal, the law is very clear that no healthcare institution, organization, or provider is required to opt in. They are all allowed to opt out. The healthcare organizations have to have a policy, but the providers can opt in or out as they wish. And I think that that's one of the most mindful things about that legislation is recognizing that there could be moral, ethical, and faith issues around that question of supporting a patient through a journey. And people should be free to, just as the patient should be free to choose the journey of their choice that aligns with their goals, values, and wishes, the providers should be free to choose the journey of their choice that aligns with their goals, values, and wishes. And so I think that's quite wonderful. And so to your point of clarity, this is a person who is not required by any measure or means to do this. And this is part of her commitment to her role as a chaplain to walk with people through their journeys, no matter what her personal beliefs are. And that to me is, as you said, the full representation of what it means to be a chaplain.
Yeah, that's the nature of chaplaincy. I love that thought. So if you were going to give a talk on the things that people don't know about chaplains and social workers, or the things that people misunderstand about chaplains and social workers, what are 3 things you would want to tell people about? Let's start with social workers. What are 3 things you'd like people to know about social workers? They're not out to find out all about your money, and they're not going to report you to the government.
That is true.
Yeah, that's one I've heard before.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, understanding that all healthcare professionals are mandated reporters. So of course we have to be conscientious of people's safety. That's always an important thing. But I've actually never heard that fear before in terms of hospice care, right? In that context, I've never heard anyone express that concern. I think more my experience has been that people just don't know what the value is. They don't understand what a hospice social worker or chaplain could do for them. I think that there's often a misunderstanding that it's just about, reconciling relationships. And if their relationships are good, they don't really need a social worker, or finding resources. And if they have all the resources they need, they don't really need a social worker. I think that one of my favorite things about being a social worker is the education and advocacy that's kind of baked into the relationships. So being able to meet with people and come to know them, and by virtue of that process, come to understand what they do and don't know about themselves and their journey, and then exploring with them what they would like to understand that they perhaps haven't shared or expressed an understanding of. And so this space of discovery, self-discovery, and discovery about the life journey that they're on, that's been something that I think is maybe misunderstood or not necessarily known. And then advocacy. I often have had people explain that they're going through a situation and they're on hospice or palliative care, and they're dealing with some complexity, some problem, they can't get the answers to something, or they've tried for something but it's not working. I always say, who's your social worker? Let's talk to the social worker, because that's the person who's going to be able to figure out what's going on, figure out what's possible, and advocate for you so that you don't have to bend over backwards while you're dealing with a terminal illness to make your wishes known with a clinical team that perhaps is not understanding you in the way that you need them to. So I think the education and advocacy that sort of infiltrates every aspect of the relationships is something that people don't necessarily think about, but is very much a part of what social workers are always thinking about and doing. And that goes for the team too. We're often, my experience when I was a social worker in hospice and even on our Empowered Endings team, often advocating with the administration, right? So the the team doesn't have enough education around this new option, for example. We need to bring in education so that they understand how to communicate with their patients about this thing that the patients might be asking for.
Right.
Or the team has a high incidence of moral injury because they're being asked to do things that are outside of their personal values or belief systems, or it's just particularly, there's caregiver burnout, and we need to bring resources into the team to support them too. So helping even the administration of a hospice understand better what the team needs, that's education and advocacy. And so that's one of my favorite pieces of the puzzle. And similarly with chaplaincy, I really think it's often misunderstood that it is not a religious role, or it's not meant to be.
Right.
And that people are actually trained to understand a wide variety of belief systems and to meet people in a wide variety of human experiences. And my experience in particular, which includes not only ecumenical Christian, but also a robust Eastern education, Eastern tradition education, and more. It's really fun to get to know people and to understand who they are and what their belief systems are, and to have become familiar with enough of them that I can hold my own in a conversation and in the companionship. I think people misunderstand that the chaplains are actually really excited often about learning more about how people experience the world, what they believe, and connecting with them at that level, even if it's not their own personal belief structure.
I think there is a fear that a lot of patients and family caregivers have, is that the care that they're going to receive from the chaplain especially comes through the lens of a certain viewpoint, which in the chaplain's case is religion, the chaplain's personal religion. In my experience, that does happen. That does happen sometimes. But for the most part, I think we're really good at coming alongside somebody and saying, hey, this is your journey. I'm just here to prop you up and support you. How can I help? And what I hear you saying about social workers is they are mediators and counselors and translators. Because when you look at the clinical pieces, the medical and the nursing clinical stuff, we like to use the jargon and the big words and all the initials and CHF and COPD. And by the time it's all over with, folks are exhausted. They're grieving, they're sick, they're tired. And then we try to lay out all this Medicare rules and regs and hospice and cert periods. Social workers are there to come and say, this is what this means, or let me clarify this for you, or let me get the team to clarify it for you. I know I've had some palliative care folks on the podcast recently who've talked about a lot of times being present for family conferences with the team. So that's another thing I think social workers and chaplains bring to the table, is this ability to pull everybody together to really define goals and flesh out which direction you're going in without everybody smacking each other around. Maybe the chaplain provides that calming influence. I don't know. But to act as mediators and to get everybody on the same page. And those things are so valuable when it comes to the care of somebody with a serious illness.
I think getting everybody on the same page is probably one of the least recognized, most valuable pieces of the puzzle. And you're right about family conferences and mediation. And, I think there's also a sense for a lot of the team members. Let's say there's a patient who's living in a facility and the hospice team is involved and the family is involved and the care team at the facility are all involved, and there's some sort of misalignment or misunderstanding about what the patient needs or how to get it.
Right.
In my experience stepping into those conferences as the social worker, everybody is relieved that they're not the one having to figure out how to thread these needles and get everybody to understand each other.
Oh, for sure.
Everybody is relieved that it's somebody else's job to make all of this work in unison. And I think that's where I experienced a lot of respect for the position of a social worker is there's often a recognition that, they don't know how, a SNF administrator doesn't know how to get a family to understand what they can and can't do on the basis of California regulations. A clinical nurse isn't trained to make the administrators understand how to provide appropriate care. So all of these puzzle pieces are just coming from their perspective. And as you say, the translator, there's no one person who speaks all of those languages other than the social worker. And also, as you say, the chaplain tends to be a very gentle presence. And I think that those two roles, also coming back to the original conversation, they see things that other people don't necessarily see. Everybody's looking through their lens, which is normal and appropriate,
Right.
and what we're trained to do. And the social worker's job is actually to examine outside of their own lens what else is happening and what else they need to pay attention to and what they need to draw in and what they need to gently help people let go. And that's when it works, it's really magical, actually getting all of those different voices to come together and be on the same page and head in the same direction. It's a really powerful experience.
Yeah. The strength of the interdisciplinary team when all those disciplines are utilized, it's really amazing. I think it's transformative for an end-of-life experience for a patient and family.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think it's the best thing. I mean, I think it's one of the best things that's happened in medicine. And I think it would be incredibly valuable if we moved that upstream too. I love that there are more nurse practitioners and physician's assistants involved so that people can have more time with their providers than there's been a period of time where doctors' time is really limited with their patients. And so building out a team where people can connect more with someone who's part of their clinical care team, who understands who they are and what their wishes are, and who can, again, be a translator. I think that interdisciplinary teamwork should be in every aspect of medicine. I think that would be a great gift.
Yeah, I do too. And the upstream use of it would be so valuable.
Could you imagine? So right now, insurance covers, to my knowledge, a 15-minute conversation between a patient and a physician regarding advanced healthcare directive documentation.
15 minutes, which, by the way, is an entire appointment.
Exactly. Could you imagine if we built into the system a meeting with a physician and a social worker, a patient and their power of attorney, and extended that to a time frame where you could actually have a conversation about concerns, goals, values, wishes, decisions, conflicts, concerns, and how to execute those documentation and all of the things that stem from it? What an incredible gift that would be to humanity and to the medical system, to have the clarity that would come from those conversations, the alignment that would come from those conversations, the documentation that would come from those conversations. Mm-hmm. So, advanced care planning and end-of-life planning, all of these things would, I mean, and this is also our experience, right? This is one of the things that Bob and I have spent years doing, is meeting with patients and their loved ones and having these extensive conversations. And the peace and the clarity and the sense of ease going into the rest of their life, which could be decades.
Right. Even when people want to have those conversations and are open and receptive to it, the healthcare system doesn't make that easy to do. It really doesn't. Advanced care planning, it's so valuable just to be able to converse about it. And I'm not talking about, again, this is one of those misconceptions that people have about social workers in hospice or palliative care, that they're just there to get those advanced directive signs. And it's what I call the big basics: medical power of attorney, an advanced directive, and a do not resuscitate. Well, that's the stuff that we do that's convenient for the hospice agency, right? Because it makes the care a little more cut and dried. We know exactly where you want to go with things. But to have these, the word you use is robust. I love that. Rich conversations that get deep, where our healthcare providers really learn about who we are But if we don't get to have those conversations, and I'm sorry, 15 minutes isn't even close. And that's all the FaceTime you get with not FaceTime like on your phone, but that's all the in-person presence you get at an appointment with your physician. That doesn't come close to having that conversation. It really doesn't. So to be able to have those conversations upstream when you're healthy, because let's face it, having those conversations in the middle of a crisis, what I always say is an ambulance is a crappy place to have an advanced care plan conversation.
We like to use the term conversations, not crises, for the exact same point.
Yes.
If you have the conversation upstream, you will not be in the middle of a crisis. When something happens, people will know what needs to happen next, and that's vital.
Yeah. You see people that get a call about something horrific that's happened, an accident, and they need to leave, and they start trying to figure out what they need to do to be able to actually leave the house. I don't know where my keys are. Where's my purse? Can you imagine making a decision about a ventilator for someone else's existence and life in the middle of a crisis like that? And you can't even figure out where your dang car keys are. Walk out of the house without your shoes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the kind of stress that also changes how we make decisions. And so if we already know what the decision is in advance of the event, there's not a whole process of variables that we have to move through and understand and comprehend and then synthesize and produce an answer. We already know what the answer to all of the questions are, or most of them anyway. And stress changes the way we make decisions. So when you're in that moment, I mean, there are a lot of people that I've worked with where the patient knew very clearly that they wouldn't want to be taken to the hospital if they didn't have to be. And the spouse sort of knew that, but then the thing that happened, it wasn't quite clear how crucial it was to go or not go to the hospital. And so there's so much confusion. And the default is, since you don't know, go to the hospital. And then the patient now experiencing something that they didn't want. And actually, I mean, even if you do have the documentation, there are problems. I've had a family member who had all of the documentation in order, had been in and out of hospitals for a long time. It was a really long, painful journey. Took a lot of time to get clear about when the time was right to not continue seeking treatments, and ultimately that time came. Went to the hospital. Spouse came with the documentation. The doctor ordered life-saving treatment. The nurse had to apologize to the spouse who was holding the advanced care directive that said, do not treat in these very specific ways. I'm so sorry. I have to follow the doctor's orders, even though I understand this goes directly against what you're asking me and what you have in this legal documentation. And that, with all of the confusion and that's when you need a social worker. That's when you need someone,
that advocate. Absolutely.
Not inappropriate, unethical, illegal, and we need to escalate this conversation so that the patient's rights are being respected and the family is being supported appropriately. And ultimately, what ended up happening was they called me and they didn't know what to do, and I said, get a palliative care consultation immediately. And that's what happened, and everything worked itself out perfectly, as it sometimes does. Not perfectly in that we lost a loved one, but perfectly in that the appropriate care was provided, the family was well supported, there was time for everybody to come together and do what needed to be done in order to feel complete around that journey. But those are the kinds of things where, sometimes even with what you need, it's still very hard to get the appropriate care. And that's weird thing about this system. It's I talk a lot about humanizing healthcare. That's one of the great examples to me of the medical system is not about the human beings who are being processed through it. It's really a system ultimately somehow that's gotten constructed to serve itself in certain ways. And if I can, go on about what my thoughts are on that, but the human experience in medicine is so vital. And healing is really about, sometimes it's about what the body can do, but a lot of times it's really about the spirit. And I think that that's part of what we need to bring back to medicine. And I think that that's part of why social workers and spiritual counselors are so vital to healthcare, is that we are the voice of the humanity, the existential experience that has gotten so sort of lost and swept up and in the rest of the medical system.
Yeah. I feel like we need to say that louder for the people in the back, because I do feel like we have a misalignment, because we want a system, for-profit, money-making, huge, to process the most intimate human experience. Yeah. I love your viewpoint. Love it.
One of the things that we're striving to do at Empowered Endings is aligned with what the birthing movement did in the 70s for birth and the experience of prenatal and natal care. So back in the day, I mean, way back in the day, it was a village. It was not a medical experience. It was a human experience. But then there came a time where it was a pregnant lady and a doctor in a hospital, and that was all you got. And just the way you described your mom's nursing generation, everybody did what the doctor said, period, end of story. That was it. There
Right.
was no patient advocacy, patient voice. There was no holistic care. There was not even a family around, not even a spouse or a mother or anything like that. And the birthing movement brought to bear this notion that, hello, this is not strictly a medical experience. This is a human experience. This is a spiritual experience. This is a powerful experience. And it's important for people to have the ability to navigate this journey in a way that's aligned with their values. Maybe they want their spouse present. Maybe they want their parent present. Maybe they want to be alone. Maybe they want to have a doctor driving the whole course of care. Maybe they want to have a holistic practitioner, a doula, driving the course of care with the guidance of a physician to make sure that the baby and the mother are both safe and healthy. And maybe they want to do this at home instead of in a hospital. So this is the work that we're doing is very aligned with that notion that death has become a medicalized event. Many people die in hospitals. Most people don't want to. People should be able to choose the course of their journey and chart their journey in a way that's aligned with their values and wishes. There should be options. If people want to go to the hospital and do everything possible, and that's where they would prefer to die because they've tried everything, fantastic. Let them have that. If people want to stay home and do some treatment, but perhaps not all treatment, and they want to have their family with them, and they want to have a doula guiding the rituals that they're going to be planning for their spiritual needs and their legacy, fantastic. Let them have that. People should have choice in how their journey unfolds, and they should have access to the resources that support that choice. And it shouldn't be limited to people who can afford it or who can find it. It should be accessible to everyone everywhere. And I don't think that that's a particularly controversial perspective, but it seems odd that I don't see anywhere else that is striving to make that happen. And so hopefully more people in more places will take up that banner of really allowing people and supporting people to access the resources and support that they need to have the journey of their choice.
Yeah. I think there are voices and there's an opinion out there that this is what should happen. I just don't know that we always move forward together in a way to make it happen, logistically.
Yeah. I think it's also hard because there are so many moving pieces. There are so many different parts of it. So
it's huge, huge.
We provide care and counseling in the medical practice. We provide we have a management organization that offers the replication of the practice so other people can do that without having to reinvent the wheel. We have an institute where people are able to access resources, education, community, certifications, webinars, information about things that aren't necessarily mainstream, like the intersection of psychedelics and end-of-life care, or end-of-life options, which are only legal in certain states, and free support groups, workshops, financial assistance for the kinds of care that are harder to find. That's a whole lot of different things. And I think there are definitely organizations that I see doing certain pieces of that puzzle. But I'm not seeing anywhere else that's bringing it all together. And I can understand why. It's been backbreaking work.
Right.
And it's really hard to pull it off. But I think if we can pull it off one time and then do it again 2 times, and then it starts to kind of catch on, everybody that I talk to who knows anything about palliative and end-of-life care loves the idea of people having the freedom to choose, but nobody knows how to integrate that into an insurance-based system where you can only get what insurance will pay for, and that's, in and of itself a battle. And the hospital systems, as you say, are built for their function, which includes profit as a bottom line issue. And the healthcare providers are dealing with burnout because they're beholden to the system. And then the patients are not getting what they need because there are all these rules and regulations that aren't consistent with humanity and the vast varied experiences and needs of each individual human being. And so it's definitely it's a grandiose vision to believe that we can create a ripple that will continue to affect change in our country and the way that palliative and end-of-life care are delivered. But I think it's an important one for all of the reasons that we've talked about today.
I wouldn't even say grandiose. Grandiose makes it sound like it's unrealistic. I think it is a realistic idea to want to reform and change and believe that it's possible. We weren't always like this. It just took a long time to get there. So I think change is possible. So tell me about the support that you and Bob are offering at Empowered Endings, and how can people work with you and find the resources that you guys have?
So there are 2 main buckets. One is the medical practice, which is located in California. So anyone throughout California, but in particular in person in San Diego and in Southern California, we offer care and counseling in geriatric, palliative, and end-of-life care. And we specialize in end-of-life planning, including a robust advanced care planning service line, and end-of-life options, which we've been doing since medical aid and dying became legal in California, and everything in between. We provide in-home care for people who want whatever it is that they want, whether they want to use what's available through the system and have more on top of it, or whether they don't want what's available through the system and they want to cherry pick the things that they need. And we focus a lot on high-touch physician engagement, which is not typically available for the system, robust wraparound care, and in particular support for the family. And we make sure that the families have personalized care teams that can answer their questions any time of day or night, because this is a very delicate and dynamic phase of life. And questions come up at 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday, and it's really important to have your personal care team be the people answering those questions. So that's a bit about the medical practice, and we do support people and partner with providers throughout the Southern California region. So people can find us at empoweredendings.com for that. And with the nonprofit foundation, it's a 501c3 nonprofit called Empowered Endings Foundation. It can be found at empoweredendings.org. And there we offer rich online communities. So we have everything currently that's offered is free. So we have an online community where people can come and connect with community members, as in individuals interested in learning more about aging well, death and dying, all of the different related fields that we provide resources on. We have guest experts come and speak to our community in their particular fields of expertise, and they can ask live Q&A events, ask questions and get answers. We provide resources there on all of these different subjects. We have a resource library. We have education in the form of webinars, seminars, which are in person, so typically local or regional, and also certifications. So, for example, with advanced care planning being such a vital piece of the puzzle in having an empowered end-of-life experience, we built out, after many years of experience in conversation with patients and families about how they would want their wishes documented and what concerns they had that weren't part of the templated advanced healthcare documents that states and lawyers typically give, we partnered with a company called Thanacare that built the software, and we scoped out a robust advanced care planning document and offer that service at the medical practice, but also providers, so estate planning attorneys, death doulas, nurses, social workers, anyone in the field can go for free through the certification that we built that talks about how to have conversations about advanced healthcare directives, how to have conversations about end-of-life planning, what are the important topics, how do you have you bring up the challenging questions, how do you facilitate alignment within families, and then also teaches people how to use that platform. And that's all free. The platform, if someone were to engage it, they would be paying Thanacare for the use of the platform, but everything that we offer through the foundation is free. And the reason for that is there is nothing, I think, more powerful than information, and having access to, whether you're a patient, family, or professional, the information that allows you to navigate your journey and support other people well is the most important thing that we can provide, apart from the care and counseling that we also offer in the practice. So empoweredendings.org and empoweredendings.com. And, we have a really big vision of creating empowered endings centers where people can get all of the care and counseling, education and training, resources and community that they need. We have a lot of work to do, and we've done a lot of really great things, and we've partnered with some really extraordinary people along the way, and none of what we're doing would be possible without our incredible team and other great collaborators like you and friends in the field who really get it and who want to help change the way that palliative and end-of-life care are delivered.
Nice. I love it's so varied and so robust. You're touching on every piece that we need, which is a lot. It's complicated. So there'll be links in the show notes, but it's empoweredendings.com and empoweredendings.org. And you can go into the show notes, go straight to it and connect with Bob, Dr. Bob, and Elizabeth as well. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here today on the show with me. An incredible conversation. I love the work that you guys are doing.
Thank you so much, Helen. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to the Heart of Hospice podcast. Check out our sponsor in the show notes, and please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We would appreciate it if you would share this episode with your friends and family and anyone who needs to know more about hospice. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.